have no idea what that is. Is it? Okay. You young kids. All right, so a couple things that are going on here. These are just the same way that I've set up the previous one. So it's just basic shapes from Illustrator brought in and then animated. So all of that stuff is still the same, okay? Extra stuff that I did on top of this is really making it look the way that we're seeing it, like this. If I go to the original piece of artwork, which is not that, it is there, that's hologram, artwork, hologram ring, right? So that's all the original artwork looks like. And then After Effects is all the rest of it to make it look like that. So I'm going to break this down into some pieces so we can see exactly what's happening with each one of these. So the better you want stuff to look, typically the more you have to do to it to make it look like that, okay? So this isn't just like a button click and then it magically looks awesome. Is a lot of stuff that went into each one of these pieces. So if I go into just this one piece, each one of those layers was pre-comped. So it wasn't just like the layer and then I animated it right there. Each layer was pre-comped because I wanted to do this kind of effect to it. So this is just that center ring. This is an effect that happened on top of it. The ideal situation was I wanted it to look like, you know, if this was a hologram, then some sort of technology was causing it to kind of rebuild itself every time. So there's kind of like scanning lines that would go across it. So here's the things that I did for this. I'm going to go and find the original ring again, and I'll just put this into a composition. Oops, that's not the center ring. Center ring. There it is. Okay, so that's what it looked like originally. I want to get these like pulsating rings that would go out. So I'm going to make a new solid, and I'm going to go under Effect. I'm going to go under Generate, under the G's, and I'm going to go to Radio Waves. And radio waves are these. Okay? Yeah. So if I was to animate circles going out, that'd be the same thing as this, except it's automatic, and I have different slider controls over here that I can adjust. Frequency, the more I have there, obviously, you know, or less, whatever. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at 1. I could also choose how far it expands. 1, 10, there we go. So that's before the next one comes out. You can see it's kind of jittery, so I'm just going to leave it at the default. Pretty much it was default when I initially created it. You can also control things like the fade in time, fade out time, and then the start width and the end width. Now I did play with this because I wanted this to be a bit thinner because it looked a little bit too thick at the start. Okay, so nothing is going to be just like free, you just have to always play with it. So that's like one part that I did to that. Another part that I did is, I added a noise on top of this. So I went to noise and I went to turbulent noise. And what this does is it breaks up that color. So I don't have just one solid ring of color. I now have this like noisy pattern. If I go over here to my effects and I turn off my radio waves, this is what it looks like. So now imagine that we just have this ring, and that ring is just picking up a different piece of this noise as it goes along. Okay, let me turn that off while I update some of the other settings. So this is basic, obviously. You can choose different patterns. So right now, if I went to strings, I would get this kind of pattern. If I went to subscale, I would get something that looks kind of similar to that one. If I went to dynamic, I get this. If I choose a different type of noise here, I'll get a different pattern. It's important that you go through these menus and you look at all these different items, because at some point you might need a noise pattern that looks like that for whatever reason, okay? So I'm going to leave it at that, and we'll just see what happens with it. I'm going to turn my radio waves back on. I'm going to make this a bit thicker still. I think I'm going to go back to 5 and 5. And I'm going to choose a different profile. Right now it's square, so it's like the same width here and the same width there. If I change this to triangle, I'll get more of like it's fading out on the ends is what it does. Again, you can play with different ones to see different results. That might look cool, that might look cool, depending on, again, what you're trying to go after. And I accidentally moved my center pivot over, so I'll put that back to sawtooth in. There we go. That's still on, good. Okay, so that gives me this. Now, the kind of distortion pattern that happens on there is going to come from an effect called displacement. And what it's going to do is it's going to register black and white values as how far to move something over. So if I have an area that's white, it's going to move that over further than something that's black, okay? And so I'm going to make this really chunky just so we can really see this. I'm going to put this at 50, should be good there. And something happened to my turbulence. What did I do? Oh, I turned my contrast and brightness down somehow. There we go. All right, so put this back to sawtooth in. There we go. I'm going to leave this a different color. I'll leave this as, let's say, white, I think. Okay. All right, that works. So now on my center ring, I'm going to go up to Effect. I'm going to go to Distort, and I'm going to go to Displace and Map right there. Okay. So again, the way this works is it's going to use the layer as where it's going to displace. So I have to tell it which layer to use. Use layer 1. And then if I use the source, and you'll see these settings a lot inside of After Effects, the source is like the original shape. So if I went to my solid gray and I turned off these effects, that's what the original shape looked like. There's no detail there, so there's not going to do anything. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to change this from source to using effects and masks. And so now what it's going to do is it's actually going to use the effect of this as how it distorts it. Now we can't see it doing it because this layer is currently on top and invisible. So if I just turn this off, now we can start to see how this is then broken away. Okay? If I go back to this, turn off displacement, perfectly smooth, turn it back on, we get this distortion. The bigger this number, the bigger that number, the more distortion we're going to get in those areas. So if I set this to, let's say, 10, you'll see we get more distortion. If I set this to 20, I'll get more distortion. Right now it's using the red channel to control the horizontal, and it's using the green channel to control the vertical. So just as a test here, what is the red value of, let's just go to the easy one first, of this. What is the red value of this area right here? 0. What is green? 0, right? Pretending this is exactly a 50% gray, what is the red of this? And then green? 50. Exactly the same, right? If I were to shift this to a colored image where we did have a predominantly red or predominantly green, it would make more sense as to, you know, these things we could do more stuff with. Right now they're pretty much the same, or they're exactly the same. Red's the exact same value as green is the exact same value as blue because it's grayscale. But be aware that you could actually bring in an image that has different color values and use that as a displacement to control how something moves. Okay, so let's turn the top layer off. And now when I hit play, what we should get is this really cool like flickering at the end of it, right? Because it's kind of like rebuilding itself on the edges. Now, something else I could do, I don't think I did this on mine, but I could actually use this top layer as a transparency for where it is visible, right? So instead of getting a perfect circle that just kind of flickers on the edges, I could have this ring that kind of like flickers as it goes out. So if I just switch my mode and turn this to a track matte, there we go. So now we get this ring and then it goes like that. Okay, or we can say, let's try Luma Matte. Okay, and now we get this kind of neat pattern that's underneath. In this case, maybe it doesn't really match what we're doing, but let's say I went into my turbulence, I went to my contrast, let's pull that up some, let's turn the brightness up, there we go. And then let's also change it from like a block to a linear. And then let's go to the radio waves, and then let's take the thickness down to, let's say, 10. Nope, that's too thin. Let's say 20 and 20. There we go. So now we have this kind of more circular thing that just kind of distorts on the way out. Now one thing we'll find is that we'll get a pattern. So as this comes out, right here, and I'm going to really distort this so we can really see this effect happening. Let's go there, and go there, there we go. You can't? Oh, sorry. Let's throw an adjustment layer on here. And you go on top. And let's go to color correction and exposure. And we'll just take the exposure up some. There we go, much better. Okay. All right, so what we're going to see is that this is going to look very stagnant. Every time it expands, we're basically expanding over the same noise pattern every single time. So when there's like a little cutout in one spot, every time it loops, it's going to have that same cutout. You can see this little dip right here. As I go frame by frame, you can see how this like little thing sticks out. And if I go back to the first time it came out, well, there it is again. If I go back to the next time, there it is again. So another thing you'll find in a lot of these kind of noise pattern type things is something called evolution. And evolution is basically a way to control movement of that item. So let's turn this on so we can see it. Let's turn the radio waves off. Let's turn off our adjustment layer so we can see what that looks like. And now I'm going to go to my evolution, and as I click and drag this, you can see how it's evolving. It's kind of like morphing itself throughout time. And so something like this, typically I'll go through and I'll do a time expression on it, where I just set the time to be equal to, I don't know, 20 in this case. Time times 20. And what I'm looking for is just a nice amount of movement so that every time this thing is like expanding out, I get different patterns. 20 might be a little bit too soft. Let's go with 80. That might be better. Oops, hit play, that helps. There we go. So that looks better. All right, so let me turn my stuff back on. And as I work, typically I'm not like constantly like jumping back and forth between these tools, like turning things on, turning things off. But for your sake, I'm doing it so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so now we're getting different noise patterns each time. It might be subtle, but it definitely is there. Even if we were to kind of like freeze our radio waves in place, and we were animating this noise, you would see that this turbulence is actually going to be kind of like wiggling around as it does its thing, okay? Which again is pretty neat how it does it. Now, I don't want to lose the ring because I think this ring might be like a cool effect to add on top of it. So that's where I can use my mode, and I can set this to multiply. Did that do anything? Not really. Let's see something else. Maybe add. Nope. I'm not really getting anything off of this that is beneficial. Yeah, let's change the color of this. Maybe we change this to like red. And then we did normal. Nope, why aren't we seeing anything at all? Who broke this? Oh, I know why. My adjustment layer is killing everything because I've over brightened it so I can't see any colors. That makes more sense. Cool, so let's go back to that. Let's go back to our radio waves. Let's set this to, yeah, we'll set it to like blue because that's kind of the color I had anyway. That bluish color. And I'll set this to, again, like an add or something. Now, if I'm not seeing the results that, like, oh, I was really hoping to get that same idea there, sometimes it's a matter of maybe changing the opacity on something, playing with a different mat that you're using here, changing this a different way. There we go. So now we're getting a little mix of it. So you can see I'm getting a mix of those two kind of things on top of each other. If this is all the way up, I really get a nice mix. That's what I was after. There we go. Okay, now if I still like that setup and I want a different color, then I can use the adjustment layer, not use exposure, but then I can use hue and saturation, colorize, and then I can shift this to whatever color I'm going after. And don't be afraid to like make something huge and hideous like this, and then go back into the settings and then slim some stuff down. So my radio waves is just too big. So 5 looks good there. And I think I'm going to switch this back to triangle. I think that looked better. Okay, so now I'm getting this kind of like noisy, distortion-y pattern on top of my stuff with these rings. I could also duplicate these rings here, put this on top, no track matte, and tell it to use that same dark solid, yes. There it is. Or maybe not, that didn't look good at all. There we go. Okay, so I can do different things, different mixes of how I'm setting up all of these things, okay? Maybe I like it just like this. Maybe I want to take this effect in my other composition and duplicate it a couple times and then offset them or whatever. If I just go back here, this is that composition that I'm currently working in. I could put this into a new composition. There it is. I could shift the colors if I need to. I can duplicate it and change this to an add. I can offset it. And so now I have like a double set of rings. Okay, so you have to be able to work in this multi-layer setup to do these kinds of effects on top of this. So to each one of these, not every single one, but like the few main ones, I did those same effects to. Now inside of this composition, I also did some other stuff to them to make them look even better. So I'm going to look at each one of these different things. So each piece in here, center 2 is the ring. Just can't see it. Why can't I see it? There it is. Actually, let me go to my outer border. Outer 2 and outer. Okay, so I'm going to isolate these two. Okay, so these, remember, inside of After Effects or Illustrator look like this. That's this outer piece right here. Okay. Inside of After Effects, it looks like that because I did a couple different effects to it. So let's go to this one first, I guess. So one of the things I did to get this thing to animate on the screen is I used a block dissolve and a card wipe in order to get these things to turn themselves on. So the block dissolve, let me go back to my example one here. Actually, I'll make a new example one so it's just flat so we can see it cleaner. And there's nothing wrong, and you actually should go into different comps, try stuff out, see if it works, and then apply it. If I go to a block dissolve and I just change the transition, I get this. Okay, so that's all that that's doing. Now if I crank up these settings to, let's say, 10 and 10, turn off soft edge, and then I do this, I get this kind of like pixelated transition. So I could even make it bigger, 20 and 20, whatever I need to. Okay, so I'm going to animate this coming onto the screen, so I'm just going to put a keyframe, scooch up a little bit, put another keyframe. Okay, so now that looks okay. So then I want to add something else on top of it, so I went to another transition, and I added a card wipe. And let's go to where we can see this. So the card wipe works by just wiping like this. So if I use the block dissolve and the card wipe, I end up with this pretty cool looking transition of how I got them on the screen. So on the card wipe, I have to choose what the back layer is. Right now I'm going to say none. And now if I go like this, you'll see that it goes from that to something else. Okay. Typically you would transition if you're using this from like a boy to a girl, or a red circle to a blue square. Two different items. Yes, sir.
So, as far as animating this, how would you like keyframe it?
Still with that transition complete, right? So that's only, we're only animating the one thing, and then I just kind of like look at both attributes and how they're playing together. So they're not going to work like, you know, as the one block starts to appear, it's not going to like twist. It'll just look kind of like it's scanning across it and popping into frame. So I'm looking for basically like random computer-generated nonsense, is a technical term. That's all I'm looking for, okay? Now this is still too clean, so if I switch this to random here and random here, I'll get a random direction of how they're coming in, okay? And if I don't want to go from, because it's going to animate from this way to that way, I can change it down here, right to left. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go back to the beginning. I'm going to set a keyframe. I'll scooch up a little bit, set a keyframe there. So now let's watch both of these things happen at the same time. So you get these like a stack effect. Okay, it's actually pretty close on where they were set up. So if I offset, let's say, the block dissolve, What do you mean?
Like, because now you're editing the keyframes for how that's animating, right?
Right.
Yeah. I'm just a little bit confused about how it actually got.
How the animation got applied?
Yeah.
Oh, I just set the keyframes here in the effect. So instead of coming down here and hitting the stopwatch, I clicked it there.
Oh, okay. I didn't notice that. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, anywhere there's a stopwatch, you can set keyframes on. It doesn't have to be just in the layer area at the bottom. All right, so these work pretty good actually when they're like close together. And then I think it works better too when the blocks are not as big. So I'm going to go 10 and 10. And then even down here, I'm going to make more rows. So I'm going to say like 50 and 80. There we go. So you see, we're like, it looks more high definition. It looks like we have actually like a resolution to our grid, and it's kind of building itself as it goes. Now, right to left is still kind of boring. I'm going to go top left to bottom right. Right, and now it's a little bit more interesting. Now, each one of those pieces, I changed just that direction, but I left the keyframes in the exact spot, okay? So I didn't adjust the keyframes. Now, once I have one of these set up, I can copy these, Control-C it. I'll just make a new layer so you can see me do it to this, and then wherever I click and paste, that's where it's going to create the keyframes right there. So now I'll have this layer on top, or I could shift it down and have one layer here, and then one layer right there on top. Okay, so each one of those pieces are timed at a different rate so that they all animate differently. So that was part of it. And then the other part that makes this thing look the way it looks is this filter called Edge Finder. And I think it might be under Stylize, Find Edges. I think that might be it. And what it does is it finds the edges. So I can go into here and I can play with what I want to see. This is a composite of both items, the edges and the surface. This is just the outline, and then you could do outline mask too, I guess, but I just used outline. What do I want to create an alpha channel, or use an alpha channel? And then what level? So the more I adjust this, the more refined it's going to be. So I just found like a number that seemed to work really good, where I was getting this kind of like dashed data inside there. It's actually 90%. And then I can come down here to the width and lower that, make that bigger, whatever I need to. Okay, so I actually did this to each one of my layers has that same effect. So once I had the block dissolve, the card wipe, and this edge finder, I was able just to copy those and paste them onto each one. The edge finder is not keyframed, but the other two are keyframed. Okay. So somehow you have to animate your stuff coming onto the screen. That was one way that I did my specific ones. Now on my other ones, my other pieces, I did a block dissolve and a card wipe, so those two things are the same. And then the other thing I did was I added a grid to each one of them. Okay, so like this is a grid for each piece. So let me jump into my example again. And on this piece, if I go under Generate and I go to Grid, I get something that looks like this. If I switch the blending mode to Stencil, what this will do is it'll maintain it just inside that circle or just inside that shape. And then I can play with the width slider and then make these really tight, change the border to something really low. Maybe that's too low for this. 2's good. You could also feather if you needed to feather, you wanted to soften it some. Okay, and then I used this, and I'm just going to duplicate this one. Get rid of the grid here. I'm going to leave the edge thing on this, so let me go to Stylize, Find Edges. Oops, it's not Find Edges. Let me go to my effects. And most of these things you don't need to know the exact name for or location. If you use this preset area, you can say, okay, I want to find edges or do something with my edges. Maybe there's something in here. Find edges, that's the one I was just on. That wasn't it. Roughen edges, edge blur, deluxe edge finder. Edge finder, there you go. Yep. So under key correct, I went to edge finder. it gives me these like cutouts, which I had to go through and say I wanted this to be an outline, and then I wanted this level to be 90, and then I wanted my tolerance here to be lower. That was it. And then the width to be lower also. There we go. And so now I have this kind of like double effect of the grid coming in. You add that grid on top of the other thing on top of that, and you get this really cool looking effect, okay? And again, it's not something that you're going to just know how to do. It literally took me about an hour's worth of playing with different settings, just trying to see what looked cool on one piece, and then copying those to all the other pieces, okay? And then adjusting them accordingly. You'll see that every one of my pieces are offset. I don't want all my pieces to be locked into the same exact spot. I don't want everything to come up at once because it doesn't feel like a hologram. It feels like a brand new TV that works perfectly, right? Nothing just like comes on immediately. Even if you remember the old TVs, it would start like in the middle and kind of warm itself up slowly or fast to the outside, right? So same kind of thing. So all of your stuff should animate on the screen. All of your stuff should have some sort of offset to them. We already talked about doing the 3D stuff and how I parented things. So you can see how everything here is parented. Go ahead.
What do we need a motion blur?
Anything that moves.
Okay.
Right? So anything that moves needs to have motion blur. Anything that has keyframes, you need to look at them and see, do these keyframes warrant easy ease? Do they warrant speed graph? Most of the time, yes. However, if something is just spinning in a circle like this continuously, there's not really a need for speed graph because you don't want it to go vroom, and then slow down and go slow down. Typically, like for this, I just wanted this like easy loop happening. All right, so that was that part. Let me jump to a new composition and just show some different ways you can create stuff inside of After Effects that you may find useful. Oops. And I'm just making this at a random size. Don't worry about my size right now, okay? So one thing that we have in this room, okay, this lab, any of the MACA labs that have After Effects are these things called trap code. If I find the list right here, there we go. One of these is called Form, okay? Red Giant creates this bundle called Trap Code. Typically, if you're working in the industry, you're going to use Trap Code at some point. Most of the companies, like, they don't buy all the plugins, but Trap Code is typically the one that if they're going to buy something, this is what they will buy. So I'm going to go to Form. It's going to check for my license. There we go, and now it works. If you want to use Trap Code at home, you can download the trial, you can use Trap Code, you'll get a big red X as you're working, but then when you come here and you open it, it'll read that there's a license and it'll render it without a red X, okay? This is a very neat tool. What it allows you to do is, I'm going to go to the, not the show forms, the base form, and I'm going to choose one of these things. So right now it's set to box grid. It looks kind of silly, but let's say I go to rotate. You can see how this is actually like rotating like a grid of particles, okay? Now that's pretty neat in itself. We can obviously change how many particles we have. Let me spin around so we can see this better, like that. I'm going to lower this to, let's say 20 and 20. Here we go. And then I'm going to go in the Z direction and also choose 20. And now we'll actually have like a full-blown like grid of points. So you can create some cool stuff like that. Again, it has a stopwatch, so we can animate it. But if I go here and I choose something like Object Model, it'll actually allow me to go to Choose Object Model, and then I can pick a 3D model that I could use instead of just that box. So if I wanted to create, let's say, a tech orb, a gun, yeah. Same thing, I can just go in here and rotate it. Now you'll notice the cube was a lot quicker rotating than this is. Let me just set a keyframe here, let me scooch up, and let me set this to 0. And then we'll hit play and we'll watch it kind of rotate. Okay? So any 3D model that is an OBJ file, you can bring in. The lower the resolution, the faster it's going to go. So you don't want to bring in like a full-blown character or a million polygon vehicle, but you definitely could bring in some other objects. If you go to Turbo Squid, this is a free, they have pay too, but they have free 3D models on here of different things. So you could say, oh, I want to put, I want to put this submarine in there, right? So this is free. It's in an OBJ format. I would register, download it, and I can use that OBJ as my model. So if I go to choose, what was that? For the hologram, yeah. And then you could say add new object, find your object, and then it should work. Okay, here's a city.
Can we transform images to OBJ files?
You cannot. You have to actually build the 3D model.
Oh.
Now, with some software, so there's actually an app for your phone you can get. It's called 123D or something like that, where you can take pictures of your head and it'll generate a 3D model of your head or whatever item. I'm going to change the position of this to get into the city. It's still thinking. Oops, that was the wrong way.
Is it only for iPhones?
No, I think it's for any phone, for Android. It's made by Autodesk. What was that?
Is it accurate?
No, it's free. It's good enough. Let's put it that way. It's good enough for our hologram that we're going to have just like a spinning item if you want to have a spinning item there. Okay? So, 123D or 123D catch or something like that. Yeah. There's other ones too, but that's one through Autodesk that they make. There's other ones out there that are available. So there's form. You can use that. You can go through the menus and customize what the points look like, the color, all that stuff, the movement. I'm going to not do this anymore. I just wanted to show you that plugin because it's pretty neat. You will get a layer. That's whatever object you've brought in, you'll get a layer. Don't delete the layer because that's the layer telling it what is the 3D item. Okay, so just leave that alone. Other stuff you may want to do is you may want to animate, let's say, scrolling text happening. Like that. Okay, so there's my text. So there's different ways that you can do animating text. I'm going to go and throw in some guides real quick just so I can see this here, and that there, and this here. So that's where the lines are at. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to my position and I'm going to just set a keyframe here. I'm going to scoot up to 10 frames, let's say. And then I'm just going to change this vertically to go to the next line. So that'll be next line. And then I'll go to 20 and go to the next line there. There we go. Okay. Now, I may not want this to scroll because text on computers typically doesn't scroll. Typically, it would like jump up, right? It would like jump to the next line. So if I change my keyframes, instead of these being linear, meaning that they're transitioning between each one, I set them to hold keyframes. What they will do is that they will hold that position until they get to that next keyframe, and then it'll jump, right? So you see it jumping. Then we could hit the Alt key and do a loop out, and then just say continue. And what continue should do is just continue that motion. You moved up this far, you moved up that far, and then it'll just keep doing that same thing. I lied. Why isn't it doing it?
I think you didn't put the number after that.
Well, let's try that again. Oops. Oh, wait, offset? It was offset, not continue. I don't know. I thought that was it. I think it would just like stay on that same spot, like stay where you're at. I don't know why you just would not have that. I'm sure there's a use for it somewhere. Right, just holding for the entire time. Oh, sorry. part of this is because we're using hold keyframes. So because this is holding here, that's where it's like locking in. So maybe if we didn't have that as a hold, and we did have that as a direction, it would have continued on that direction. Sometimes you'll use these in conjunction with other expressions like if-else statements. So I might say if the time is 5, then just set it to stay here. But if the time is less than 5, then do this looping animation. These expressions can get really involved into what you put in there, right? So I can do something like this, and then I could put a box around it so that I only see certain parts. So I only want to see, let's say, these lines here. This isn't going to be very effective because all the text is the same, but you get the idea. This alpha mat, there we go. Right, so now it's just in this little boxed area that I have my text that I want to just be right there, okay? So something just quick that you can do for getting your text into there. There's also some other tools that you can use text for. Let me make a new solid. Let me go to my effects. Let me go to time. And come on. Oh, text, sorry. Time code. And then this is kind of a neat one too, where it'll just show the time code. So if you're just looking for like a number that would gradually go up, there's a yeah, and you can change different things, like what format do you want to show. Here's the frame number. Here's the feet. Here's the feet plus frames for 16 millimeter. And then do you want to composite on the original, or do you want this just to be on its own? So, and you could obviously move it, make the text bigger, have no background. Oops, that's not no background. There we go. Change the opacity, whatever you need. Okay, so just different ways you can animate things like that. All right, so let's make another new composition, just so we're cleared. And then I'm just going to drop in a couple of my elements here. Outer ring and dash thing there. Okay. So I just have a couple elements in here. And I'm just doing this just so you can get a quick idea. My other one goes really slow. I'll jump into that one after, but just so we can get the idea of this, of how this is going to be set up. Imagine this is our entire hologram setup animated. I'm going to make these 3D. I'm going to make a null. I'm going to make sure that everything is centered. So there's the center of this, which if I click on my null is also the center of my null, which is good. So then when I grab this item and I parent it to the bigger one, and then I grab the bigger one and parent it to the null, make everything 3D, that everything should move together. So I rotate, that works, that works, that works. And then rotate this one independently, and then rotate these two together. Okay. This one's rotate didn't pop up. Why didn't you pop up? There it is. Okay. So I'm just going to do just a quick little expression on this one, time times 100. And then the other one, I'm just going to do it a quick expression, time times negative 100. And now they should, whoops, it's going the, it's like not moving at all. Times negative 200, there we go. So now we got them going in different directions. And then this one, which direction do I want to go? Like that. Okay. So I'm just going to animate this one manually. Just keyframe here, keyframe there. Let's go negative 90. There we go. Okay. Right. Now that looks weird because it's flat. We're not getting any perspective on this. So I'm also going to go to the position, and I'm going to set a position keyframe. So position keyframe here, and a position keyframe here. Oops. To move that down. So that way it feels like it's like rotating and flattening out. Okay. Now on my other one, I added some extra little like things kind of moving with it so that it felt like it was, again, more 3D. So I'm going to just jump to my comp and steal those. All right, so I'm going to turn the 3D part of this off, turn the motion blur part of this off, and then hit play just so you can see what it's supposed to be doing. Where are you at? Oh, you're right there. Why are you right there? Let's move you into this position here. There we go. All right, so you can see it there. It's just like a little beam shooting up. Okay, it's very difficult to see. All right, let's make sure opacity is up. There we go. All right, so now you can see this beam shooting upwards. Okay, so I want that beam to be kind of like, if my thing is a circle, I want them to be like in the edges of it. So I'm going to make it 3D. I'm going to go here where it's all flattened out nice and neat. Actually, sorry, I'm going to go here where it's all flattened out nice and neat. I'm going to parent this to the null. And then I'm going to rotate this thing so it's facing the camera. Okay, so you have to imagine that my hologram is like this, facing the camera, and this other piece is going this way. I want to rotate it so it goes this way towards the camera. Okay, so I'm going to rotate like that. Should be 90 degrees because everything is 90 degrees lined up. And then I should be able to grab my X direction and slide this over. To get it accurate, I'm going to switch my view. Instead of the active camera, I'm going to switch this to the top view. And then I can see this bar is my original hologram pieces down here. This shape layer is that one. So I'm just going to grab the red. Oops, I lied, it's the other way around. And grab the red and slide that there. And slide this here. Okay, so now it looks like it's touching. I'm going to go to, let's say, the front view. Slide it over a little bit in the red here. There we go. Now I can switch back to my active camera. And then now when it plays, you can see how it feels like it's moving with the camera, and it's kind of shooting up from that side. Okay. Now I'm going to jump back to my view here, jump back to my top view. I'm going to jump back to my front view. There we go. And I'm just going to duplicate this and then slide it over to this side. And then duplicate this and slide it to the middle. And then slide it down. Slide it to the middle. Slide it down. We're so close. There we go. Okay, then duplicate this one, slide it over there. And then jump back to my active camera. And now we get these things that are moving with it. Now, just like we offset all the dissolves and everything else, I would do the same thing here. All these just kind of randomly would be at different times. Right? So it feels more organic this way. And if I needed to adjust one, like this one on the right side, seems like it should be over just a bit more. Let me just squish him a bit further in. Yeah, the other one seemed fine. Like maybe that one on the left also should be squished over a little bit that way. There we go. Okay, and then once I take the opacity down, it feels a little bit more embedded in the surface. It feels like more like it's part of it. I know it's hard for you to see, but it looks awesome on my screen. That 30. Okay. And if I want these to go on forever, I just continue this. The way I animated them was the same way we've animated them before. No secret there. I just added loops to each one. So I did my start and end. So I animated the start and end moving like I've shown before. And then I added a cycle to it so it constantly cycles that same animation over and over again. Okay. So if I go back to this one, all the stuff that I talked about is right there. The only thing that I didn't talk about is adding a camera. You don't need to add a camera. This will add a lot of render time to your stuff if you do. But I will show adding a camera just again, in case you want to. It adds a nice little touch to it. Right now we're through like a default camera, just like, you know, locked into this frontish view where we get some perspective. If I go to a new camera here, set this to one node, we'll get more into what those mean later. And then hit OK. Now I have a camera, which is right there. You'll see there's no difference in what those two things mean. This is where the difference comes in. If I double click the camera, I can enable depth of field. Okay, now we'll wait a second and see if it updates. We got no update. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the camera options, Depth of field is on. I'm going to lower my aperture. So if I set this to 2, set this to 0.1, I should see something. Why aren't I seeing anything? That. But it shouldn't be because my... Oh, sorry, I went the wrong way. In 3D, it's the opposite direction. I'm going to make a bigger aperture, so 20, and now I'm getting a focused area. So this is more in focus than that. And then by playing with my focus distance, you can see how I can bring things into focus or take things out of focus. There we go. So maybe a little bit there, and then play with the amount. And again, this is going to be a subtle thing. You don't want it to be like blown out, like obvious. That's too much. Like obviously depth of fielded. You want to have a soft little bit piece to it like that. So there's a definite difference right here. Like this, you can't see at all. You guys got to keep telling me this. Let's just go to my layer there. These are not opacityed out. All right, I'm just going to make an adjustment layer again. Or I can go to this and just make that brighter. There we go. Okay. This is definitely fuzzier than this, but that looks appropriate. If I went further blurry on that like this, that would be like way too much. Okay. You just want to find a nice little happy area. Now again, this will take more time. With all the different pieces and all the different stuff happening in this, it's going to take longer for this to go. Our next assignment, we will be using this. But this one, we don't have to use it. Okay?
Will we use a blur tool?
You can use the blur tool, but it's still not going to be the same kind of blur.
Okay.
Right? Because what's happening here is that this is in focus and it gradually gets blurry. With the blur tool, it's going to be like everything's blurred. Okay? So in this, when I go down to here, and you can see it's loading, blah, blah, blah. I have this part is in focus. This is the fuzzy part. That is the fuzzy part back there. Okay? So I really kind of focused it right into that zone. The camera does not move. We can get it to move, but don't animate them because that's just another level of complexity we don't need yet. The next assignment, we will get more into cameras. Okay? So at this point, everything for your hologram is done. Your shapes are done, they're animated, you have stuff going all over the place, things are spinning, it looks like it's in 3D, so it's moving in that 3D area. Maybe you've gone through and done some additional effects on top of this. There we go. So these are more effects. So I took my original ring and I added a glow to it. And then I also added a Venetian blind. That will give me the lines. So that's just a transition that splits it apart. But if I change some of these settings and keep it at 50, I get these nice little like digital lines in it that make it again feel like it's more hologrammy. And then the glow just is a glow. And then I did another glow on top of this one. I just duplicated another glow, changed this to an add. And then I duplicated it again. And then I did an add, but what did I do with this one? Oh, yeah. This one, I created a turbulence on top of it to create these kind of like streaky dots. I use those streaky dots as a mask for the one below it. And what that gives me are these little like bits. Let me turn it off so you can see it. These little like streaky bits on top of this. If I turn off both of these, you can see just like that. And again, it's just something to kind of vary the brightness of it. So in some areas, it's going to be a little bit brighter. Again, thinking about how holograms would work, it adds a lot to it. Motion blur is on like everything. Literally everything that has movement has motion blur to it. And then I took that and I pre-comped that into hologram 3. There it is. And then this is where I scaled it down. So if you remember, everything we've done originally was on this bigger resolution. So in here, this is where I go to my comp settings and I make it 1280 by 720 by 24. And then I scaled it to 50% to fit. I don't do that until the very last step. And the reason for that is because I want to maintain my resolution. If my resolution is lowered anywhere before this, it'll look grainy at this point, okay? Like if I were to have taken one of my rings here, and let me make sure I just have the right one. Nope, that's the wrong one. And I scaled this up, like let's say I wanted to really zoom in. Well, that's a bad example. Hold on. What's that one? All right, maybe we'll drop it here. Nope, that's an example. Oh, layer 2 and layer 1 didn't have anything on it, that's why. Center, center, there we go. So I'll drop this one on here. And if I were to have scaled this up, you'll see how it'll start to look really grainy. I don't want that. So that's why we do it at the very last step. Everything is nice, clean, smooth here. And this is going to go slow. You can see as I hit play how slow this entire thing is moving. Okay, this is literally like let's walk away from the computer, come back and check on it later kind of thing.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
We put it on half to like preview it. Will it be half when you like render?
No, it'll be full.
Okay.
Yeah, and if anything, you can just set it to full, render it, and then it'll do its thing. Mm-hmm. Double the 1280 by 720. Yep. So we set it at that big, we work on it that big, and then we shrink it down at the very last stage. And the biggest thing is that it just gives us a lot more flexibility to work on our stuff. Nope, it should just be good, well-paced, right? It should feel, yeah. Okay, so at this point, I'm happy with the way this looks. So now I'm going to import my title card, change my name on the title card, change the number on the title card, have a title card, have a transition, have my hologram. And again, it should flow from one piece to the next. It shouldn't be title card, a cut, a transition, a cut, and then a title card, or then a hologram, and then a weird cut. Everything should flow from one piece to the other. I'm not going to go through that because we've been through that several times. Yes, sir.
Oh, I thought you said we were going to be like booting up our hologram.
You can use that too, right? So you can use your title card, transition to the hologram text animator you did, and then use that as the starting point for this.
Okay.
So you can use that too. You don't have to use it, but you could.
Okay.
All right? So that'll take you all the way to the end of that assignment. Everything that I talked about obviously is not going to be in every single one of your assignments. Some of these things you're like, okay, I need to know how to do this. You Google it, you YouTube it, whatever it is, you'll find some way someone's tried to do exactly what you've done. The biggest thing is looking at different references, seeing what other people have done. Obviously that helps tremendously. Okay, so that should take you to the end of that assignment. Questions on it? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep, because you're working right off of that After Effects file. Yes, sir.
So in order to animate the effect styles that you were doing, like the kind of digital like patterns and things like that, we can just do that on an individual layer. It doesn't need to be pre-composed, right?
Correct. The only reason I did it on the other layers because I already had other stuff going on. So like some things, like I'll show you if I take this one, once I make this 3D and then I were to, let's say, rotate it like this, it's hard for me to make another layer here and do the radio waves because now the radio waves are going like this and the other one is like that.
Yeah, I get you.
Right? So it was easier just to put everything in there. That way it's more like standard.
No, that helps a lot.
That's fine. If you think of it. Anything else? Yes, ma'am?
I noticed that sometimes you were doing like your levels and stuff all in its own file.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm doing them in a separate one altogether.
Yeah.
Right? So what I do is it depends on the specific kind of effect that I'm going for. Sometimes I want, let's say, just like one layer to have a levels or something. Sometimes I want a group to have a levels. Sometimes I'm like, okay, this is good. I would just want to bake it down and do a levels there. So it all depends on your own preference as to where you do those things and what level of control you're trying to create. When I'm in my original one here, and let's say that I don't like the color of this center one. What is this one? This is the worst part, is just it's so darn slow. There it is. On this one layer, I would go to my color correction. I would go to hue and saturation. I would say colorize, and then I would give this a lot of color, and then a year later it would update barely, right there, okay? So it did update that one specific one. I think I maybe lightened it too much. Yeah. Yeah, it's barely adjusting, but it's adjusting this, right? So that's just that one layer. If I knew like everything was good, but I want to adjust the entire thing, that's where I would do it to a different composition. I just think it's easier than having adjustment layers and adjustment layers and adjustment layers. It's much easier just to have this that I'm working with, where it's just like this one layer, add stuff on top of that. Or here, where I just have this one layer, and I know like at this point, like, okay, everything is pretty much good, but I still just want to shift my color some. So I can desaturate it, shift my hue, and now we have basically an entirely different scheme, right?
I was more referring to like in your first, one of your first demos, you were adjusting the liquid levels, the thing you made bounce in the meter thing.
Mm-hmm.
You had that in its own composition. Do you think
Oh.
that works better for the workflow to take the elements out and animate them all separately and put them in
Right.
the main comp?
So something like that, definitely. Because if I have a composition that does this kind of animation, I can duplicate that composition 5 times, change some parameters, now I have 5 different items that are animating separately. However, if I want to adjust colors on all of those individually, that could be an issue. So again, that's just your own preference. Sometimes it's easier to have everything just like, focus on this one item, make sure that one item works. It does. Now I can drop that into something else. Versus I have all this stuff. I have items here, 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 and I'm trying to manage everything at once.
So to make separate comps, you could just take your Illustrator layers, cut them, copy paste them, and then put them back.
Yep.
So when you apply an animation in 2D, it all transitions into 3D like seamlessly, right?
Well, a 2D animation is different than a 3D. We have to make sure that we've clicked that 3D button. Okay, then we get the 3D options. So like before we had one rotate, if I just rotated it there, it would just go like left and right. But once I hit 3D, then I'll have the other ones. So if your question is, let's say I wanted the circle to spin like this, and that's how you animated it, and then you hit 3D, that will still translate fine to the other one.
Okay, cool. That's pretty much what I was thinking. And then also in that case, for the most part, then would you suggest like pretty much animating in 2D first and then moving to 3D?
It all depends on the specific one. So like in Alex's example, like I have the bars going up and down. Those bars going up and down is like their own thing. When I do 3D, the 3D for those bars could just like have them move up. So these are 2 different kinds of animations going on.
I gotcha. Yeah, I might just ask you some more specifics about mine.
Okay. Like these ones here, I found it easier just to like, okay, I'm just gonna make everything 3D and then animate all the stuff just kind of spinning and tumbling around.
I gotcha.
Right? Anything else?